Hello, folks, and welcome to one of two recorded classes that I am leaving and posting on Moodle to replace the two meetings that we were supposed to have this week. That due to the complications of the occupation of the building, we could not fulfill. But I hope that these two classes will be good explanation and exploration of the concepts that we were supposed to have. First, with our discussion of Umberto Eco's The Open Work, the concept of opera aperta that he brings in a multitude of articles from his The Open Work book. The other class is about Peculiar Sam by Pauline Hopkins. And that one I will edit later and I will post next week for a discussion, for a Moodle activity that I'm going to put up on Moodle, okay? But this first one is the one that matters the most to us because it will be aligned with a discussion that I want to have next week with the first class on Wednesday. Give an introduction to our readings and in-class discussions on the short stories that we will read from American literature in the 19th century. We will read more authors along the rest of the term, like Stephen Crane and Charlotte Perkins Gilman and Kate Chopin and Washington Irving. And this text by Umberto Eco and the concepts that we can derive from it will hopefully help us in discussing those texts and bringing our ideas and concepts together to engage with the reading and the comprehension and the collective understanding of the text in the many different perspectives that we can have of a single text. And this is basically the foundation that Umberto Eco brings to us with the concept of the open work in his text, The Poetics of the Open Work. So hopefully you have read this text and you have sort of explored and tried to understand Eco's ideas, the key elements that he tries to bring and illustrate in his text. He uses the concept of composing in music to try to convey that idea of the open work. But I would say that the fragment from his writings that best tackles the idea of the open work actually comes from an article that he wrote next up in his book, because the book is an anthology of different essays. And the second essay brings a passage that I would like to read from you. I'm going to put it on the screen here. And the essay itself is the analysis of poetic language. And he writes that every work of art, from a petroglyph to the Scarlet Letter, is open to a variety of readings, not only because it inevitably lends itself to the whims of any subjectivity in search of a mirror for its moods, but also because it wants to be an exhaustible source of experiences which, focusing on it from different points of view, keep bringing new aspects out of it. And this is what we can say inaugurates, or would best describe, would encapsulate what this major idea of the open work is all about. He was following a current of ideas, a tendency in literary theory and critical theory in general, to look at art and to look at the reception of art and reading and listening to and being in an audience as less of a passive activity and containing more active or interactive possibilities when engaging with the text. For him and for many other post-structuralists of the time, Roland Barthes is an example. For them, it would seem that now not only the creator of the piece of art would be in charge of projecting meaning and bringing possible or possibilities for interpretation of a work, but also now the focus was shifted to the audience as well. So spectatorship or readership would be also in charge of coming with from different directions and coming with, as he points out in the fragment that I brought, subjectivities to try to understand what that text is about and what that composition is about. He uses the example of an interpreter bringing composition, a musical composition from the past into the present and having to adapt it to new audiences and a new market and new necessities, new artistic necessities, and having to negotiate what would be the priorities of basically recomposing that piece of art. That's what an interpreter does. So you take a sonata by Tchaikovsky or Paganini and you have to adapt it to the 20th century. You will inevitably impress upon that new composition your own identity, your profile as a composer, as a musician, the elements that make up everything from your background in education about music to the surroundings and all the cultural heritage that you have acquired over your life, and everything from personal experiences to your view of art and to the way you deal with composition itself, to the way you play the instruments that you will bring to that complexity that forms an orchestral composition. In this case, an interpretation of a song or a piece that will create a new work. Okay, that's why a musical composition, at least in terms of classical music, remains an open work. It remains open to new interpretations, and it remains open to a new form, a new structure of composition. That steps into the realm of adaptation, and you can take some of those arguments to explore the different possibilities and the different perspectives on the process of adaptation, and how, for example, if you make a film adaptation from a novel from the 19th century, you will inevitably also bring your own cultural background, your own personal background, the different forms of the different sources to your subjectivity into the creation of that new piece, of that new work. So Umberto Eco is departing from the standpoint of post-structuralism, like I said, opposing the traditional views of the work as an autotelic source of knowledge, or a literary work, in our case, specifically speaking, as the most authoritative layer of that structure of art, right? So the text itself stands above everyone else. That would be usually aligned with the idea that the author is the main source of meaning, because the author was the one creating that text, the one writing that short story or writing that novel. And as such, the author has the final say on what the novel or the short story is trying to convey as a main message, if there is such a thing, right? Because some texts, they convey many different messages. We recently saw with the activity on The Haunted Mind and Young Goodman Brown that those are two short stories that, even though they're very, very brief and they are relatively simple in structure, they're open to many different interpretations. And the ideas that stem from them can acquire many different characters. And when it comes to characters, speaking of which, each character can represent a different thing in the case of Young Goodman Brown. And in the case of The Haunted Mind, that very introspective sort of narrative mode also has a flair that allows the text to open up to different experiences of readership. And that results in the complexity and a multitude and a plurality of different readings that you can have of that text. So as us individuals in the 21st century in Brazil looking at that text, will have obviously a different comprehension of what the text means, and it will speak to us in a different way. So what Roland Barthes and Umberto Eco and Mikhail Bakhtin and other writers from that era were trying to say, at least when exploring literary theory and artistic creation, they were trying to distance the core elements of artistic production from the untouched, almost sacred image of authorship. So centering the main elements of a text, or the importance of the text, on the author. The author is no longer the center of or the main source of meaning for one experiencing those texts. So as you shift towards the second half of the 20th century, readership or audience, the audience itself receives that level of importance, or it is shared between the author and the audience, to a point where the famous death of the author is declared. And then Michel Foucault comes up with what is an author, to problematize even the image of the author or the figure of the author as this central point of artistic creation. Now, the audience, and that is something that a reader response theory, for example, takes as a heritage, as an inspiration, the audience gains a lot of prominence, a lot of protagonism in the process of creation and, development of an artistic piece, and then reception, as being the final target of that text. Naturally, the audience will have a say in shaping the meaning of that text over time, basically, imprinting upon history what the text is about. So much so that authors have become frustrated with an interpretation that a specific set of an audience can have of a film or of a novel or of the lyrics of a song. But in truth, and now we know better, living in the 21st century, that there is no such thing as being frustrated. Now the work belongs to society, and society will inevitably have a different interpretation from what you tried to accomplish or you intended to accomplish with the text that you have produced. But it is a natural process of experiencing art that you bring your own backdrop and your own life experiences, your past experiences, to inform you or to help you read through that subjective lens what is written upon the text. So the text itself gains priority, and the readership also gains that level of agency that was lacking before, or that was never truly acknowledged or presupposed. So in an attempt to possibly organize this scrambled set of ideas that I tried to explain previously, I'm going to try to bring some passages or sections of the text, of Eco's text, to try to illustrate the points, the main points, to him and to us reading now the open work would be, which is a great contribution to both literary theory and musical theory when it comes to the crafting side of it and the reception side of it, which is as important as the production or the crafting side of it is. The reception is now, or has been over the past few decades, a center of attention for literary theory and for many different theories of art. At page 12, for example, he brings up an idea that the auditor, and by extension an interpreter of a musical composition by someone who, composed it a long time ago, when you're listening to that musical composition, or when an interpreter is listening to it and trying to come up with a way to play that song in his or her own time and place, we're trying to make sense of it. We're trying to restructure it. In Eco's words, we're trying to collaborate with the original composer and trying to understand how that musical structure works in our minds and how we understand it, how we engage with it. All of that is part of a very complex and completely unperceived, completely unnoticed, because it is, in a certain way, subconscious process of interacting with a song, interacting with an artistic composition, making it make sense. Okay, the same thing can be said about a text. Let's take a difficult text like James Joyce's Ulysses. So Ulysses is a stream of consciousness-based narrative that takes place in a single day, right? So it is like a brief period of time, but there is a lot of this in-depth description of everything that goes on in a character's mind, as Joyce is trying to convey that in this very fast-paced and very fluid sort of language. So the communication of it can only be made sense if the other side of it, or, someone who is receiving that message, the addressee of the novel, is able to make sense of all of this. And you will make many different senses of it. So Ulysses remains as an open work to anyone who's able to read it. And there is no such thing as not being able to read it. You'll make some sense of it as you read it, no matter how detached from your place in time and your understanding of the particular form of English that was used to write Ulysses. You will make sense of some of it. You will still try to put the puzzle together to extract some meaning out of the novel. The same thing happens with a piece of music. If a composer uses some very unusual musical structure to build up a scene, it will still elicit emotions, it will still elicit reactions from you who is listening to it. And through that, because the composer is, possibly dead, he cannot come up to you and tell you what the musical composition is about, and we do not expect such a thing to happen. So you make sense of the piece of music and you give it meaning. It will make you cry, it will make you laugh because it is like unusually comedic, or it can be a comic book that has a very cartoonish, very childish way of drawing human form, and then you look at it, you have different reactions to it. So this sort of perception-based understanding of a text, or first impression-based understanding of a text, is also important and also very subjective. Does that mean that every single explanation or interpretation of a novel or a short story or a poem is valid? Yes, it means that all of them are valid. If collectively we can make sense of it is another story, because we need argumentation. And for example, in an academic setting, we will need to back up our understanding or our impressions our interpretation of a work of art or a literary piece, but that is still based on your own subjective, personal involvement with that text. The same thing goes with music, which is what Eco used for illustration in his text, or argumentation, at least initially. And that argumentation culminates in the passage that he brings to us at page 9, which I think he brings the core element that is his main thesis. And he writes there that, hence, every reception of a work of art is both an interpretation and a performance of it, because in every reception, the work takes on a fresh perspective for itself. I know I've said it a thousand times in class, but when you read a text, when you take, for example, a text from a long time ago, and you take Milton from Renaissance England, and you bring it to the 20th or 21st century, and you read it, and collectively as a group, we try to make sense of it and we discuss it. We are bringing this fresh interpretation of it, and we're putting the pieces of the puzzle together once again in our own way, with all the dust on top, with all the rust that it has, such as the passage of time has impressed on it. And we're giving it a new life. We are trying to put the pieces of the Frankenstein monster together and giving it life and giving it our own reading of it. So Milton in the 21st century, just as Hawthorne in the 21st century, Charles Dickens in the 21st century, will be a completely different kind of work than it was in the 19th, in the 18th, 17th, 16th century, and so on and so forth. Does that mean that we are disrespecting the work of these authors? No. And that's part of the point that Roland Barthes brings with The Death of the Author, that now we should shift our attention and our set of priorities when doing literary criticism from authorship and to readership, right? Because the author writes and lives on and passes away and is left in history. And Milton, just as much as Dickens, just as much as Dickinson, just as much as Shelley, they are not here to dialogue with us anymore. What we have is their text that we can dialogue with. And as time goes by, different audiences will dialogue with that text and try to make their own different senses of that text. They'll try to impress new meanings and extract new meanings from it. It is a dialogical process of reading and rewriting as we read and as we discuss, because the reading emanates. It just doesn't stay on the text anymore. As we share it with our collective circles, the text then emanates. Then it can come up to life, and then we can expose and extract and give back to it, sharing amongst ourselves our impressions and interpretations of it. We help build that plot to the story, treating the story as something of a fixed chain of events, and the plot as a constructed chain of events, right? Something that we can manipulate and we can change order, and the story is that fixed, already solid or solidified chain of events. And finally, just to go back to the text, at page 19, Eco writes that, to sum up, we can say that the work in movement is the possibility of numerous different personal interventions, but it is not an amorphous invitation to indiscriminate participation. Just like I said about the random free interpretation, the free-for-all interpretation. It's not such an extreme perception of that idea. The invitation offers the performer the opportunity for an oriented insertion into something which always remained the world intended by the author, right? So intention always is this point of controversy in the realms of, in the many different movements of literary theory. But still, it remains to us the duty of taking up these texts and assigning new meanings to it, or revising the meanings that have been assigned to them and changing them as we go, but giving it the deserved level of importance that they have, right? So as we read important texts, as we move on, and these seminal texts that have an importance for a reason, and we keep coming back to them, we keep assigning new meanings to them and recognizing the ones that already exist, because they always, they also exist for a reason, right? So when people make, I always use this very same example, when people make a new reading of The Tempest by Shakespeare and applying to it this new post-colonial, decolonial vein of criticism to it, what we're doing is this: it's recognizing the importance and the relevance of The Tempest and trying to read it from an angle that has everything to do with our place and time, and that we can now give it the relevance that it has for us. We're not changing the text. We're not like indiscriminately violating the text. We are just reading it from a different angle and trying to rewrite it, applying to it the lens of history that it is deserved. And this is what we collectively do as we go to the simplest of contexts, just like a classroom at UFSC, and we discuss these texts. We try to associate the importance and the meanings that we can find it with our own time and place, with the issues of our day, and we try to share it with other colleagues from other backgrounds and other places and other cultural points to see what we can find, the fascinating interpretation that one colleague has that you haven't had, that you can receive, and you can now think about that text and look at it differently. And the same thing can happen the other way around. You can provide a different standpoint or a different perspective on the text that other people have not had, because you have your own backdrop, your own experiences, and your own, sources of information that will help you read that text differently. So let's bear all of these ideas in mind, and let's come to the class on Wednesday having these ideas fresh in mind to hopefully read these short stories under a new light, and sharing our perspectives, just like we have done with poetry and drama so far. Now with prose, with these texts that are completely open to us, right? They are open works, and as such, they deserve their importance. Let's shift the focus from authorship to readership and give the text the centrality that it deserves. So let's carry some of these ideas to our next class next Wednesday, and I hope this myriad of ideas that I brought here made sense, and that we can use it to read the texts. I hope you have a good weekend, and next week we will see each other and we will discuss our next texts. Okay? I'll keep you posted on Moodle about our class, and every new piece of information I will keep you updated. Sometimes I know that you guys get updated before I do, so let's keep informing each other, so to speak, and see you next class. Okay? Have a good one. Bye-bye.